The National Desk, America's News Now.
Developing now, southern border battle.
Anyone who tells you that the only way to secure our border is to punish asylum seekers is lying.
Democratic lawmakers calling for an end to Title 42 as the GOP drills down on our nation's border crisis. Plus, Russian retaliation. Air raid sirens blaring as the Kremlin renews strikes following a Western push to arm Ukraine.
As a leader in the world, the U.S. needs to do what we can to help them get what they need.
The president taking more aggressive action as Republican lawmakers question the cost.
Alec Murdoch took a 12-shade shotgun and shot him in the shoulder, in the chest and the shoulder.
From lawyer to defendant, where prosecutors say investigators found gunshot residue implicating a well-known South Carolina attorney who may have killed his wife and son. And later, taxpayer funds in the hands of the Taliban. The fact-check team uncovers why U.S. equipment in Afghanistan was left unaccounted for.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now. Thanks for being with us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. On this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week and a look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following all week. First, a week of violence, mass killings in California, plus 1 man dead following a traffic stop in Memphis, and looming layoffs, why some economists believe companies will keep cutting jobs. Then, crisis in the classroom. A new AP class causing debate in Florida, why state leaders say its curriculum is against the law. But we start with the document debacle, the latest batch of classified files found this time at the home of former Vice President Mike Pence. The National Archives now asking all former U.S. presidents and vice presidents to recheck their personal records. The National Desk Audra El-Nashar reports from Capitol Hill, where some lawmakers say there appears to be a pattern of carelessness.
Scrutiny now surrounds former Vice President Pence, President Biden, and former President Trump's handling of classified documents. Members of Congress shocked to learn Pence joined the list, even his own brother.
What in the hell's going on?
I never knew it was possible to take classified documents out of the SCIF.
Disbelief and aggravation.
I'm frustrated that if anyone doesn't handle confidential and secret documents in the manner in which they're supposed to. It's clear that some protocols weren't followed.
There are very strict protocols in place when members of Congress view classified materials, but with the revelation of documents being found in Pence's home, many lawmakers are starting to wonder if those same protocols are not in place for the executive branch. A critical part of all of that is the chain of custody.
I think when they pack up the White House, they throw a lot of material into boxes and ship it out to wherever the president's warehouse is, and some stuff gets mixed up in it. That's my guess is what's going on.
For mandatory.
According to the Associated Press, former President Jimmy Carter found classified documents at his Georgia home at least once and returned them to the National Archives. It's not clear when that happened, though Carter signed the Presidential Records Act into law in 1978, but it didn't apply until the Reagan administration. These days, lawmakers know how high the stakes are if documents are improperly handled.
My wife is a naval intelligence analyst. If she took one document home, classified, she would be prosecuted. Me, I would be prosecuted.
Democratic Senator Gary Peters, chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, working on legislation to better protect federal records, while the Justice Department looks into how and why classified documents ended up in the wrong place. On Capitol Hill, I'm Audra El-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
A new poll looks at a possible 2024 matchup between the current and former president. Emerson College found former President Trump would have a slight lead. 44% would support Trump compared to the 41% who say they would back President Biden. 10% would support another candidate. 4% say they can't decide. New details following a wave of violence this week. There have been more mass shootings than days so far this year. The Gun Violence Archive reporting 41 mass shootings in the U.S. in the past 27 days. So far in 2023, at least 70 people have been killed and 167 hurt. The White House now renewing calls for stricter gun laws. Developing right now, music streaming platform Spotify is the latest tech company to announce mass layoffs, letting go of 6% of its workforce. The company says the cuts are being made to rein in costs. Those costs come as a survey from the National Association for Business Economics showing more workers are expected to be laid off in 2023. It's the first time since the start of the pandemic that more respondents expect falling employment instead of an increase in staffing at companies in the next 3 months. But new data shows the U.S. economy is growing at a solid pace despite fears of a possible recession. The Commerce Department reporting that gross domestic product, the broadest measure of economic activity, increased 2.9% in last year's fourth quarter. Those results beat expectations. Meantime, lawmakers are struggling with the next step in addressing the nation's debt. The U.S. recently hit its $31.4 trillion borrowing limit. The Treasury Department saying failing to raise the debt ceiling would have catastrophic economic consequences. But House Republicans want to negotiate spending cuts before agreeing to another limit increase. Now to the crisis in the classroom. The state of Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis could face a lawsuit after banning an AP African American Studies course. The National Desk's Amber Robb has more on this ongoing battle.
AP course controversy.
Black history is American history.
In a news conference Wednesday, Black leaders calling on the state to reverse its decision to reject a high school AP course titled African American Studies. State Representative Michelle Rayner says Governor DeSantis is blocking students from learning important history.
You cannot say on a Monday that you support Dr. King and on a Wednesday refuse to tell his story.
Earlier this week, Governor Ron DeSantis and the state saying the AP course is contrary to the state's law, lacks educational value, and is not historically accurate.
This course on Black history, what's one of the lessons about? Queer theory. Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids.
The course was developed by a nonprofit college board and was only offered in some schools this year as a pilot course. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump backing a lawsuit they say they will file.
We're here to give notice to Governor DeSantis that if he does not negotiate with the college board to allow AP African American Studies to be taught in the classrooms across the state of Florida, that these 3 young people will be the lead plaintiffs in a historic lawsuit.
Students outraged, saying the governor is censoring their education.
There's the Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as the Black Wall Street Massacre, something I had to learn on my own time because we don't learn that horrific history in AP US.
However, Governor DeSantis says the course is imposing ideology under the guise of history.
It's just cut and dried history. You learn all the basics, you learn about the great figures, and I view it as American history. I don't view it as separate history.
And a rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, now increasing calls for change in Washington. The Fact Check team digging deeper into what hate speech is and is not protected by the First Amendment.
A new bill proposed by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat from Texas, would impose criminal penalties for white supremacy-inspired hate crimes. I'm back with the Fact Check team tonight, and some are quick to claim freedom of speech in cases like this. But Courtney, help us understand cases in which hate speech might not be protected by the First Amendment.
Speech can't be punished because of its hateful content. The First Amendment makes no general exception for offensive or hateful expression, but when you look at context, speech with hateful messaging can be punished if it directly causes certain specific specific imminent serious harm.
And precedent on this was set decades ago. You looked at some of the history. What'd you find there, Courtney?
It all goes back to 1942 when the Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment doesn't protect fighting words. Courts have generally ruled that the First Amendment protects speech if it causes only emotional injury.
All right, so let's take a closer look now at when speech is not protected. Janae, tell us more about the exceptions here.
Well, Eugene, there are a few. So incitement to imminent lawless action, meaning the speaker is likely to violate the law, speech that threatens serious bodily harm, or speech that causes an immediate disturbance of peace. Now, if the speech falls within one of those, it isn't protected. Also, there are narrow exceptions for public employees and institutions. For example, so a public school can punish a student for yelling a racial slur, or a public employee like a police officer can be disciplined for making a racist comment while on duty.
Sure. Now, we often see these free speech cases make their way all the way up, through the court system. Why is it so complex?
Well, because it's so hard to define exactly what constitutes hate speech, and it really depends on the situation, who's involved, and what they think.
Yeah, lots of variables to be considered for sure. Ladies, thank you so much. And you can read more on this fact check team topic, including links to where they found their information on our website, thenationaldesk.com.
Ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now, a criminal tactic gaining speed in Austin. How we're told thieves are targeting residents as they're fumbling for their keys. Plus, the state making it easier to road trip with electric vehicles. Those stories next in 90 seconds. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, starting in Texas, where Austin police are reporting a rise in robberies called jugging, when thieves stake out and attack victims while they juggle other tasks like unlocking their car or using a smartphone.
We've also seen an increase in this type of crime.
The city of Austin ended 2022 with a total of 149 juggings.
Most juggings don't involve person-to-person contact. It can actually involve someone going to, get money at the bank, and then they leave that money in the car and walk away from the car, and then the car is broken into.
That's exactly what happened in Round Rock. Round Rock PD is looking for a suspect caught on camera committing the crime back in November. A woman withdrew cash at a bank and left it in her car to go inside a Goodwill. Surveillance footage captured a Toyota RAV4 following the victim into the parking lot. After that, a man exits the RAV4, breaks into her car, and steals the money.
It is not a new crime. This is something that's been around for a while. And really, over the last about year to 2 years, we have gotten better at identifying juggings.
The crime has captured attention over the last few months, and police are getting better at identifying them. But they don't all get solved.
So 149 juggings in 2022. How many of those had resolution?
I don't know the answer to that. And of course, we apply a lot of resources to person crimes, to crimes of violence. So if it does end up being a crime of violence, it may have a better chance of being solved.
Over to New York now, where used cooking oil thieves are again hitting targets in the Albany area to later resell the oil in the black market, according to authorities. Local businesses, including the company that's supposed to collect the oil, now calling on federal and state leaders for help. The CEO of Buffalo Biodiesel discussing the issue with one of our reporters back in September.
It almost pushed us out of business. In some areas, we're unable to operate. So we've actually pulled reps off the ground or expanded operations. Some of those areas are as high as 80% theft rates.
The company sent letters to multiple government agencies hoping for some help, saying it's impacting their business in New York and 11 other states. In Oregon, the state's Department of Transportation is gearing up to install more electric subcharging stations. With $67 million in federal funding for the project, the new stations will be spaced out about every 5 to 50 miles along interstates and highways across the state. A spokesperson for the Transportation Department saying the expanded access will help make EV driving in Oregon more convenient.
Accessible to as many different kinds of EV drivers that we have, because certain people have different kinds of cars. They may be towing. They may have other considerations that the charging stations being located so close to those exits, I think will really help.
A start date hasn't been announced, but it'll be a 5-year process starting with some of Oregon's busiest highways like Interstate 5. So to come here on the National Desk, America's News Now. A TikTok, now a critical piece of evidence in the Murdaugh murder trial. The state's former top attorney breaking down the possible timeline at the crime scene. The South Carolina attorney now on trial himself for the double murder of his wife and son. The state's former Attorney General, Charlie Condon, went one-on-one with our Eugene Ramirez, breaking down the bombshell evidence revealed in the courtroom as the trial of Alex Murdaugh continues.
An officer among the first to respond to the scene said there were no tears on Murdaugh's face. And we also heard that Murdaugh immediately offered a motive, linking the murders with that deadly boat crash that his son had previously been involved in. And we often hear that people process shock and grief differently. So how does Murdaugh's alleged behavior at the scene play into the prosecution's strategy?
Well, the prosecution did in fact bring up that he was somewhat casual with at least one of the officers arriving on the scene. But another officer also said that he wasn't there to judge in effect how someone does process grief and wasn't going to read too much into it. So I don't know if it would be that effective relative to proving much. Although this business about the defendant bringing up the boat crash right away, and there was information out there that he had been beat up or threatened. That was a theme from the defendant from the get-go, which did seem suspect, right? I mean, here you are discovering your wife murdered and your son murdered, and all of a sudden you're bringing up who could have done it very quickly. Yeah. It did seem a bit possibly staged.
Sure. Now let's talk about potential smoking guns in this case. First, that Snapchat video we keep hearing about that Paul Murdaugh shared the night he was murdered, being called critical to the prosecution's case. What do you expect to see in that would make it so critical?
Well, the reason it's critical, and hear me out on this because it does get a bit technical, but the state claims it can prove through cell phone data and movement of cars, the timeline on when the victims were murdered and the location of the defendant. And they're inconsistent with his claim that he wasn't at these kennels. And you have to really follow the timeline very closely. But it was very powerful because the timeline, it doesn't appear possible if you believe what the state says they can prove forensically. We'll have to see if they can do it.
It might be more about the data than the actual content of the video. But before we let you go, I want to talk to you about...
Exactly.
I want to talk to you about something else that's come up. The gunshot residue allegedly found on a coat that Murdaugh took to his mother's house about a week after the murders. How could that evidence be used to prove his guilt or to tie him to the scene?
We'll have to see. That's been referenced in opening statements, and it's really the first full day of testimony here. And I've been in the courtroom for all 4 days, and we'll see how that goes. I'm assuming that may come in tomorrow or maybe early next week. But if in fact it's as the state alleges to be the case, it'll be highly suspicious as to why he would move such information in effect, because it's GSR on this this gunshot residue apparently in some sort of tarp to his mother's attic, mother's home. So to see how that plays out. So you're teasing out quite well what might be coming up. But to date, I would say just overall, I think the state has started off with a strong case. The defense has tried to land some punches that I don't think have been particularly effective, but they're building a case that they say they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But to date, I do think the state's off to a strong start.
I'll tell you what, it's definitely captivating audiences across America. Former South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks for your insight.
Good to be with you.
Ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now, startup struggles. How some entrepreneurs are gaining the funds to get their businesses off the ground. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. A Seattle couple building a home in the median of an interstate ramp. Look at this. They constructed it out of repurposed materials, saying they worked with what they had while trying to seek permanent housing. And a home outside Nashville now under contract days after its Zillow post went viral for picturing the house up in flames. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. Looking ahead to stories making headlines this week, on Monday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is headed to the Middle East, where he'll meet with leaders from Israel and Palestine. Conversations expected to center around the conflict there, plus the Iranian nuclear threat. And sports fans in Massachusetts will be able to legally place bets in the state starting Tuesday. Massachusetts is the third state this year to legalize the practice. Then on Wednesday, the Fed expected to raise interest rates another 1/4 percentage point following their first meeting of the year. That's down 1/2 point from December's hike, but would be the 8th time in a row the Fed has raised rates. The pandemic brought on a small business boom, but the nation's economic uncertainty could cause challenges for new entrepreneurs. The National Desk, Janae Bowen's joining us now with more on those potential hurdles for business owners.
If someone's thinking about starting a business and worried about a recession, well, one analyst I spoke to says there's no need to change your plans, but you should expect some challenges.
Of course, it's on my mind.
Fears of a recession and inflation are on the minds of business owners across the country, especially new ones.
We just hit our 1 year back in November of 2021. So we're still pretty new.
Haley Seeger's swimwear company One With is just one of the more than 10 million new small businesses that have been created within the last 2 years.
But, you know, we really have seen such positive momentum.
But not everyone may be so lucky.
Young businesses are more vulnerable than experienced businesses in general.
Analyst Jill Gonzalez with the finance website Wallet Hub says a fifth of all startups don't survive year 1 of operation, and only about half make it to year 5. Now add the current economic uncertainty, success may seem out of reach.
It might prove a little bit harder, again, depending on where you live, to get a business loan than in some other places, just because of the current economic landscape.
Gonzalez says banks will have the lowest interest rates, between 4 to 7%, but those are the hardest to get. SBA loans are averaging 10 to 16%, but businesses may have an easier time securing an online business loan, but could be paying interest as high as 99%.
It's risky, but it really does depend on what type of business you're looking to start. Make sure that you're in the right place for it.
Now, Seeger is fully aware the odds are stacked against her, but believes it's her time.
I do just think that, you know, founders and entrepreneurs and just people who are generally scrappy tend to always figure out a way to make it work.
Seeger was actually denied for a business loan several times before she found a way to make it work, ultimately getting help with funding through a business called BAGS, which specifically helps diverse and women entrepreneurs. And even though she's had some difficulties and the future is uncertain, she believes now is a good time as any to start a business. I'm Janae Bowens for the National Desk.
Janae, thank you. Changes might soon be coming to COVID-19 vaccines. FDA advisors are proposing a once-a-year shot similar to the flu vaccine. It would likely cover multiple strains of the virus. Those with weakened immune systems may get advised to get a second shot. This plan still needs final approval, and developing a new vaccine could take months. Ahead in our next half hour, banning TikTok. What one cybersecurity expert has to say about the app's connections to China. Plus, blocking land ownership. The governor trying to prevent citizens from certain countries from buying land in his state. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Didi Gatton. Thanks for being with us. The White House now preparing to send tanks to Ukraine, but some fearing Russia may see the planned shipments as an escalation of conflict. The National Desk chief political correspondent Scott Thuman has the very latest.
31 specially armored, modern, and highly capable American M1 Abrams tanks, eventually on the way to Ukraine. More than just firepower, but a symbolic move too.
Putin expected Europe and the United States to weaken our resolve. He was wrong.
For the past year, it's been heavily debated. If America's not inching toward a war, is it, at the very least, in a proxy war?
I think the answer is yes.
It's not just Russian war against Ukraine.
Is America at war? What is the line?
We spoke to former diplomat Kurt Volker, who served as the U.S. ambassador to NATO and special representative for Ukraine, and who disagrees.
In terms of a proxy war, it means that we would be trying to use Ukraine to somehow advance our own goals. No one's threatening Moscow. No one is saying we need to take over that country. It is all about Ukraine defending itself.
That support is increasingly widespread. Experts say by the end of last year, we'd spent more than $50 billion on military and humanitarian aid, not to mention critical strategic intelligence sharing, and now that top-of-the-line hardware in those 31 Abrams tanks, which could take months to build, train Ukraine soldiers on, and deliver. Critics worry too much is being provided a country also in the midst of a sweeping government shakeup, President Zelensky firing officials in another corruption scandal.
I think we always have to worry about how much we're spending overseas, and that's why I think it's important that any dollars that go to Ukraine, we have Inspector General.
But others blame the Biden administration for dragging its feet, taking much too long to give Ukraine what's been needed all along.
We knew months and months ago that Ukraine needed tanks, that they needed better air defenses. And we've been very slow in making decisions and rolling them out. And the slower we are, the more Russia attacks and the more Ukrainian people suffer.
And America now a larger part of that battle. In Washington, Scott Thuman for the National Desk.
Scott, thank you. After a TikTok trend promoting car thefts caused a surge in Hyundai and Kia break-ins, some insurance companies are now refusing to cover the cars. The viral videos tagged Kia boys, showing how to break into and drive off in many 2011 to 2021 models using just a screwdriver and a USB charging cable. Both companies now facing a federal lawsuit for failing to install anti-theft technology. And right now, homicide rates among juveniles, they're rising to alarming levels. The National Desk, Kayla Gaskins, explains the latest data showing minors are increasingly becoming both victims and perpetrators.
A few weeks into the new year, at least 10 children struck by bullets in the state of Maryland.
Young people are making bad decisions. People are picking up guns.
In Washington, D.C., a staggering 105 juveniles shot in 2022 alone. Children increasingly the victims and the shooters.
Enough is enough. We need to find solutions. How do we combat this problem?
Some of these kids are very young. According to federal data for 2020, the number of homicides committed by children under the age of 14 spiked to the highest level in 2 decades.
Our children are showing up, their first offense, their first introduction into the criminal justice system is for a violent crime where they're using a firearm.
Jason Johnson with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund argues school closures during COVID plays a role.
It really caused, I think, a lot of kids to just kind of fall out of the system, and the accountability that they were used to going to school every day disappeared.
But so do what critics call soft on crime policies by progressive prosecutors. DC's new Attorney General telling WJLA's Sam Ford he does not believe in a tough on crime approach to juveniles.
We don't make ourselves safer by necessarily having a very aggressive, tough on crime response to everything.
In Maryland, new juvenile justice laws bar charging kids younger than 13 with certain crimes.
I can tell you right now that we are not going to prosecute our way to a safer community.
Allowing a 12-year-old who brought a gun to school to walk free.
The criminal justice system sort of walking away from young people and saying, the criminal justice system doesn't apply to you.
As the fight over solutions rages, juvenile homicide rates continue to rise, along with calls from the public for leaders to find a fix. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Kayla, thank you. The National Desk Jan Jeffcoat sat down with cybersecurity expert Lisa Garber to discuss the growing number of states and universities banning TikTok. But first, the latest security breach from one of the nation's largest cellular providers.
Let's start with T-Mobile. The company said a bad actor accessed the personal data from 37 million customer accounts. Now, this is back in a November data breach. So the hacker stole names, billing addresses, emails, phone numbers, dates of birth, T-Mobile account numbers. What can T-Mobile customers do right now to protect themselves from scams that could be associated with this hack, Lisa?
This is a massive and embarrassing data breach, especially because if we contextualize it, T-Mobile is one of the largest cellular carriers in the United States, especially after purchasing Sprint a couple years ago. And this is not the only major data breach it's had in the last few years. So if you are among this large amount of T-Mobile customers, we obviously need to do the basics like change our passwords and check our credit reports, financial information, make sure you're not part of any sort of scam. But you also need to scrutinize very carefully the text messages and email messages you get from sources claiming to be T-Mobile. Even though part of the data taken wasn't the biggies like social security numbers or credit card or debit card information, the data that was stolen, hacked, accessed can allow hackers to impersonate folks from T-Mobile, which could lead to a variety of different harms. So please be proactive and aware that your information could be used for malicious purposes.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. What security measures is T-Mobile putting in place to ensure this does not happen again? Because as you mentioned, this is not the first time.
It's not. And T-Mobile has made statements to the SEC in the past couple of years, especially after some of the more recent data breaches it experienced, that it has substantially invested in cybersecurity. Whether we believe that right now is to be seen, but it's made the same statement again following this breach that it will continue to invest in cybersecurity. It's a very general statement, but what we hope is that they are proactively seeking out the right types of cybersecurity talent. They are implementing better strategies for handling cybersecurity and looking at the different threat vectors that impact them as a cellular carrier.
And Lisa, PayPal now says hackers got unauthorized access to thousands of user accounts in December using something called credential stuffing. It was a credential stuffing attack. PayPal, for their part, says that they have no information suggesting that customer information was misused or that any unauthorized transactions were made to customers' accounts. But this seems pretty serious. What is credential stuffing, and what access did the attacker get to these affected PayPal accounts?
Credential stuffing is bad news for people that recycle their passwords. What it means is that hackers take credentials, your username and password from one account, let's say a bank account or perhaps a media account, and use them over and over again on other platforms to see if they can gain access. So if you do reuse your passwords, that's a problem, that's trouble. And it's something that's very cheap to carry out, and it's a type of attack that's very commonplace. And for PayPal, it was a smaller number of folks that were impacted, about 35,000, but the type of data that was taken here, social security numbers, bank account information, addresses, things that could really be used to impact somebody. And while PayPal has stated that this hasn't been used maliciously, that's not to say it wouldn't in the future. So we do need to put out all of those credit holds, make sure that we are proactive in protecting our information moving forward.
A growing number of state governments, including the federal government as well, even college campuses, have banned TikTok. Talk to us a little bit about the dangers with TikTok on our devices, given what we know about the Chinese company that owns it.
TikTok is such a popular and divisive subject right now, and we've seen state governments, about 30 different states, apply different policies related to banning the app on state-issued devices. Congress has banned it on government-issued devices, and so have the U.S. Armed Forces. Now we're seeing public universities, including Texas and Florida, approximately 20 public universities, ban the use of the app on the school Wi-Fi. And the policies are all a little bit different, but students may be able to have different workarounds because the app is so popular, using their cellular data, but the Wi-Fi on campus would ban it.
What's your thoughts about this? How important is this, do you think?
Well, the director of the FBI has stated that TikTok poses a national security threat. It's no surprise that public universities are starting to realize they could be liable if there were some sort of data breach, especially because it could impact student data, personnel data, but also research data. And it is troubling. We don't have any insight into the inner workings of TikTok, especially because it is China-based. And there are many concerns surrounding who has access to the data collected on the millions of users based in the United States.
Yeah. And you brought up another good point, too, and that is public Wi-Fi. Any company that uses Wi-Fi, it's now another question of whether or not this is going to be banned based on the Wi-Fi that you use and where you're getting your Wi-Fi from. All right, cybersecurity expert and attorney Lisa Garber, thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jan.
Interesting conversation. The border crisis will soon take center stage on Capitol Hill. House Republicans wasting no time, just announcing the first of several hearings to come. Meantime, 80 Democratic lawmakers are urging President Joe Biden to end Title 42.
Anyone who tells you that the only way to secure our border is to punish asylum seekers is lying. It's why we are appalled to see President Biden replicate President Trump's immigration strategy.
According to Department of Homeland Security officials, daily border encounters have dropped by more than half in January. After the permanent U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan after nearly 20 years there, numerous bases and military equipment were left behind. The fact-check team diving into how some of those resources and taxpayer dollars have fallen into the hands of the Taliban.
Keeping track of taxpayer dollars is not easy, but Americans demand accountability, and some resources allocated for operations in Afghanistan are still unaccounted for. Back with the fact-check team tonight, crunching the numbers. Janae, how much are we talking about?
Eugene, we're talking millions of dollars, and just for context, since 2001, the war in Afghanistan has cost the U.S. over $2 trillion. Now, that's according to research from Brown University. So back in August 2021, the Taliban, which you likely know as a Muslim fundamentalist group, overthrew the Afghan government and took power. Now, we got our hands on a government report from the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction that shows the Taliban likely gained access to almost $58 million the U.S. sent to the Afghan government ahead of its collapse.
So what now? Do we just cut our losses and walk away?
Well, a Pentagon spokesperson told CNN it can't give the money back since it's already been sent to another government. And he also says it's unlikely the Taliban got the money. But the bottom line is we don't know where that money is.
It's not just money, though. There's also equipment that's gone missing here. Courtney, what did you learn about that?
The Department of Defense reported over $7 billion in defense equipment was left in Afghanistan. But the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction said the State Department provided limited, inaccurate, and untimely information about the equipment and funds left behind, so we don't really know the exact number. The State Department says it's cooperating with the evaluation and disagrees with the claim that it provided incorrect information.
And there's some disagreement about how much is left there. Are there any questions if this equipment even works?
We found a government report that shows the U.S. military destroyed much of that equipment's offensive or defensive capabilities, meaning that those weapons can no longer be used.
Yeah, better than it getting in the wrong hands, that's for sure. All right, thank you both for your work on this, and you can read more on the fact-check team topic, including links to where they found their information by scanning the QR code on your screen, or visit us the old-fashioned way at thenationaldesk.com.
Ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now, parental rights debate. A new bill giving parents more say in the classroom that critics say is unnecessary. Plus, curbing tobacco cravings. The state with the highest smoking rates tries a new strategy to help their citizens kick the habit. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. Our team of nearly 4,000 local journalists bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. From efforts to stop foreign countries buying Texas land to a push to keep West Virginia youth from buying tobacco. We're taking the pulse of America, starting with a parental rights bill in Oklahoma.
It's a step to give parents more control in the classroom. Senate Bill 131 furthers parents' involvement in their child's education and requires written consent for decisions related to physical or mental health decisions for the student. The bill requires written consent for a child to participate in lessons about sex and gender, and for all physical and mental health care decisions. Now, if a student comes to a state employee in confidence, parents will have access to that conversation too.
If a counselor doesn't disclose to the parent information that the student confided in them, for example, something that could be concerning to them emotionally, then the counselor could be under penalty by the state.
The Republican sponsor says this will, quote, protect students from seeing, reading, or hearing inappropriate content at school.
Not every district in the state
offer sex education, but those that do often allow and include parents in that process in reviewing the materials and also giving parents the opportunity to opt out.
Governor Greg Abbott gave his endorsement to Senate Bill 147. That bill would block citizens, government officials, or organizations from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran from purchasing Texas land.
Several other states actually have laws that ban foreign nations from buying farmland, and even Democratic states like Minnesota and Hawaii.
Some Democrats are pushing against the policy.
Senate Bill 147, despite what people say, very clearly targets people who are here lawfully.
According to its most recent report on foreign farmland ownership, the U.S. Department of Agriculture says Texas sees the most foreign-owned farmland at more than 5 million acres. In an op-ed, Sid Miller, the state's top agriculture authority, writes the ownership of Texas farm and ranch land must not fall into the hands of Red China. Whether it be for a cattle ranch or a crop farm, the Texas legislature must ban this in 2023.
We're not talking about a supply and demand issue here. We're talking about using cost as a deterrent to save lives.
West Virginia coming in at #1 in the U.S. with the highest smoking rate at 23% and the highest number of youth using tobacco products. That's according to the American Cancer Society. But Senator Tom Takubo hopes his bill, the Tobacco Products Excise Tax Act, will help drop that rate by increasing the tax.
It'd be a $1.50 per pack increase, yes, and then it would be a parallel tax on other products like the e-cigarettes and like the smokeless tobacco and some of those other products. Those would be a parallel tax increase as well, with the $1.50 per tax on a pack of cigarettes.
In 2022, the more than 3 million middle and high school students use tobacco products.
It really is astronomical cost for treatment of tobacco-related diseases, primarily cancer, about $1.1 billion a year, almost $300 million a year for the Medicaid population alone.
And so to come, our team of correspondents breaking down this week in Washington, from the classified document controversy to a proposed stock trading ban for members of Congress.
Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day to report on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. For some perspective, I'm joined by national correspondents Atra Elnishar and Kayla Gaskins. Atra, the big story in Washington continues to be the classified document controversy. We know about President Biden and former President Trump. Now, classified material turning up in former Vice President Pence's Indiana home. What's the reaction on Capitol Hill?
Well, Steve, there's two main reactions: absolute shock and frustration, and they're being felt by members on both sides of the aisle. So first, the shock comes from members of Congress knowing the very strict protocols they have to go through if they're going to view classified materials. So they're just baffled that classified materials of a president, former vice president, could end up in the wrong place, in a garage, in a private office, at Mar-a-Lago, et cetera. So even Greg Pence, Mike Pence's brother, who's a congressman of Indiana, had a pretty colorful on-air reaction saying, essentially, what is going on here? Then the other main reaction is frustration, particularly from members on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Since the Mar-a-Lago discovery, they've been asking to be briefed by the administration on what was discovered, and most importantly, if it compromised intelligence or national security. And right now, members of the Intel Committee say they're being stonewalled by the administration, not getting access to those materials. The administration, though, is saying they're not in a place to share it because of the special counsel's investigations going on. Now, there could be more. Pence might not be the end of this list, because the National Archives just sent letters out to all former reps of all former presidents and vice presidents since the Reagan administration, asking them to go through their records and check to see if they too are in possession of classified materials.
So many questions. We'll be watching this, I'm sure, for the weeks and months ahead. Kayla, meanwhile, there's a new push in Congress to bar its members and their spouses from owning or trading individual stocks. What have you learned about that effort?
That's right, Steve. So this is actually an old problem that's getting some renewed attention here. So for a while now, people have thought that it is not right for members of Congress to be able to trade stocks and engage in those sorts of trades while they're voting and dealing with legislation for those industries. So for example, if you own stocks in, say, a defense company, you shouldn't be able to vote on defense bills and where that spending is going. Also, members of Congress are privy to all this inside information that could kind of count as insider trading. So this has had a lot of criticism for a while. They attempted this last year to push a bill like this through to ban members from being able to trade stocks. It didn't work. So now Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri is giving a renewed effort. He's actually calling his act the Pelosi Act, which stands for Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act, the jab at former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Her husband, Paul, was actually caught up in a trade controversy last year when he traded anywhere from 1 to 5 million. We don't have the exact number of stocks in the semiconductor industry right before the CHIPS Act passed, which a lot of people found to be very suspect. So they want to prevent these sorts of things from happening again. Will it find success in this Congress? I don't know. But this bill is bringing together some pretty strange allies. So you have Republican Josh Hawley, and then you also have Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, both on the same side here supporting this bill. So, Steve, we'll see if they can push it through this go around.
Seems like common sense, but we'll see what happens in Congress. National correspondents Kayla Gaskins, Atra Elnishar, thank you both. Didi, back to you.
Thank you all. Just ahead here on the National Desk, America's News Now, the new lineup of players vying for the sport's Most Valuable Award, plus the stars you can expect to see singing on Super Bowl Sunday. The entertainment lineup for this year's Super Bowl pre-show is out. The NFL picking Abbott Elementary star Cheryl Lee Ralph to perform what's often referred to as the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Country artist Chris Stapleton will sing the national anthem, and R&B singer Babyface will perform America the Beautiful. And take a look, these NFL players are the 5 MVP finalists: Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and wide receiver Justin Jefferson. Head coaches Brian Daboll, Doug Peterson, and Kyle Shanahan are the finalists for Coach of the Year. Winners will be announced at the NFL Honors on February 9th. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Just check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next week.